Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network CREPN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is J. Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Rich Sarkis. Rich is the executive chairman of Reonomy, a leading provider of property intelligence to the commercial real estate industry. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Rich about Reonomy and how you can utilize that to help grow your business. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple of things you can do. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, please consider leaving a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, and you can find us on the YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And also there, if you would, please subscribe. That always helps the algorithm with the YouTube. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Rich. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thanks for having me, although I fear I'm going to disappoint your guests when they go on YouTube, and this is not one of the handsome guests. I'll try to make up for it with some insightful comments.
Well, it's always kind of a fun thought there, but no, you're fine. You're fine. The lighting's good, so we're in good shape here. So,
great.
Hey, before we get into this, if you could just take a second and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I actually grew up in London in the UK, but came over to the US several decades ago to go to school here, and I never left. And it's actually in college in Northwestern Massachusetts that I caught the entrepreneurial bug when I was a 19-year-old junior. And started my first business many moons ago. The sexy way of saying that one was it was an international arbitrage business. What I found out is that you could find the exact same textbooks that were sold here for hundreds of dollars for a fraction of the cost overseas, primarily in the UK. So I set up a whole supply chain and a network of student reps promoting these books. And that's really was my first business and where I caught the bug, as I mentioned. And I started and sold a number of businesses, nothing really huge, but enough to sort of make ends meet over the subsequent years. And then I went to the dark side, went to business school because my liberal arts education was fantastic, but an education in business principles it was not. So went to Wharton back in 2005, thinking that I'd meet a new founder or two. Made a bit of a miscalculation because back then everyone at Wharton wanted to go into investment banking, sales and trading, private equity. And so I was left clutching at straws when it came to entrepreneurial sort of camaraderie, for lack of a better term. So pure option-based reasoning, went to management consulting, went to work at McKinsey in New York. Again, thinking that would be a great, way to not pigeonhole myself into one specific sector or career, and that I would, after a couple of years, go and launch a new business. Ended up staying at McKinsey longer than I had thought. The work was very interesting. They were good at sort of promoting at the right time and all that stuff. But after about 4 or so years there and had just been promoted to associate partner, that's when I realized I wanted to go back to my entrepreneurial roots. And that's where really Reonomy was born in the summer of 2012, so 8 years ago now.
Got it. Well, you did, I don't know that much about McKinsey, but they're always cited in all the big studies and kind of a finger on the pulse of what's going on in business.
Yeah, it was a lot of interesting stuff. I started, it was pretty eclectic. My first ever project was doing a revenue assistance model for the National Basketball Association. So that was pretty cool. I get to hang out in their HQ in Fifth Avenue and sort of ogle the stars and stuff like that. So it was fun.
Yeah, no, I bet that's a little bit different scene today.
Yes.
The COVID stuff. Well, great. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background there. And so what I'd like to do is kind of talk a little bit about Reonomy and kind of, if you could you basically just start with describing, what it is?
Sure. So maybe if I describe what it is today, it'll be helpful for the listeners to hear what it was and what it started off as, because there's obviously been a big evolution and a increase in the number of products and features that we have. But initially, my thesis was that we needed to do for non-single family homes what others like Zillow and others had done for the single family home discovery experience. So when you and I would want to research our dream home or find out whether we should live in this town or that town, we turn to Zillow. And unbeknownst to us, because it's a very easy to use tool, you use your map-based searching, your filters, there's a lot of heavy computational work that goes on, not just with the Zestimate and giving you an assessment of value, but also being able to bring all those myriad of different data points across all the MLSs and all that stuff. So, and that didn't really exist at a ubiquitous level nationwide. And so that was the thesis. Can we leverage technology on the back end to crunch all this data, leverage modern, elegant, intuitive software on the front end so that it's not heavyweight and burdensome to use, right? It feels just that modern, right? And so we set about doing that in New York. And lo and behold, after about a year of development, we had built the better mousetrap. And the reason we knew that is because big lenders like JP Morgan, big brokerage firms like Cushman Wakefield, developers like Tishman Speyer, all their users were using our platform in New York City to find information about properties, do some research on a submarket, drill down and find out who actually owns the property, who holds the debt, is there a note holder, all that stuff. And it was very easy for them to use, so they used it day in, day out. We used to like joke back then, because we would pour over the usage metrics, that we could actually tell when people would get off from their desks and go to the bathroom, because there would be a 10-minute gap in their Reonomy usage. That's how much they were using it right off the bat. And so basically that has evolved, and now we've got a platform that on the web application side, again, the commercial version of Zillow is now available nationwide, coast to coast. And so we have scores of not just the brokers, lenders, and investor developers, but we've got a lot of field service providers. We do have a lot of insurance brokers using our platform, as you know. And so it's become this ubiquitous web portal where you can find out information on anything that's not a single family home. And as the months have become quarters, have become years, we've also stood up a slew of different products for medium-sized companies and even large Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, where they can access our data, our analytics, our insights via API and other means.
Got it. So when you started off, it sounds like you were the whole idea was basically kind of the Zillow for the commercial property. Was that basically what I heard you say?
on the web application side, exactly. Yes, and one thing that was very interesting, and it was pure happenstance, and because we stumbled on this by doing that, because if you think about it, you can sort of wrap your hands around New York City, right? It's the 5 boroughs. There's a common data standard, borough, block, and lot. There's something called the BIN, the building identification number. So you can take all these disparate data sets across these different government agencies and make them relational. But we really had a huge struggle when we had to try and replicate that nationwide, because now you're talking 3,000 counties plus 20,000 plus municipalities, each with its own data model. And so whatever we had built in New York sort of threw up on itself when we tried to go to other markets. And what we ended up doing is creating our own data standard called the Reonomy ID, which is a unique identifier, the same way you and I have a social security number, which is our unique identifier. The same way in other areas of capital markets, there's something called the QSIP that all broker dealers, all lenders, all investors agree is the unique identifier for any company. We established that for the properties, right? And we built a huge machine learning knowledge graph, basically, that takes all of that data and is trained to resolve any record in a public or private data set to that unique ID. And that's really our unfair competitive advantage in how we've been able to have not just a massive ubiquitous web application that covers every town, every municipality, no matter if it's one of the largest NFL cities or one of the secondary, tertiary, or even smaller towns in the middle of nowhere, but also how we've been able to stand up those enterprise products that do a lot of that entity resolution for our customers, again, fully automated, but then are able to layer on all these data sets on top of that.
Got it. And so the starting point, I guess I would ask, because I'm familiar with different municipalities and the way
Right.
they show the data, and you'll specifically look like where I'm at in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
The county, I think it's called portlandmaps.com, has a fairly rich
Yep.
program. It's got, I think it's called portlandmaps.com. That's the name of it. But it basically, it goes to the lot. You've got a map, and it'll show the ownership, and it'll show permits. It'll show all the stuff. But if you go across the county line to any of the other counties, it's all like, a whole new language.
Yep.
And all hidden in different places and all that. So I'm curious, as you mentioned, if you start in like one city, I could see how it'd be fairly easy from a standpoint of familiarity and create that model. As you grew to nationwide,
Yeah.
the challenges, how did you overcome the challenges? I mean, you mentioned the Reonomy ID number.
Yeah, and that's how we did it. I mean, and look, I sort of fast forwarded through all the pain and then the fact that I lost all my hair doing it, and that, but it took years to do and tens of millions of dollars of R&D, because initially, frankly, we did not realize what you just articulated, which is there's a huge heterogeneity in the data accuracy and the data availability across county lines and across municipalities, right? And there's no federal oversight to say this is how you should record a mortgage, this is the data standard or anything like that. And so as a result, what we did is we were naive and we said, okay, well, let's do what we've done really well in New York, in the second largest city, which is LA. And that's where we realized, that's where we had our oh shit moment, pardon my French, which is the fact that LA County is made up of over 80 different cities and municipalities, right? Encino, Beverly Hills, Calabasas, list goes on. And each one of those is its own unique data snowflake. And so that's where we really realized the size of the task that was ahead of us. And that's where we went back to the R&D drawing board, and we were able to, luckily, thankfully, come up with this idea to say, well, let's build our own identifier, because none existed out there. Each one of those municipalities had a different way of recording and a different unique identifier, but let's build our own one nationwide. And let's truly turn to machine learning and AI, because we could not come up with all the rules ourselves across all these data sets. Because when you zoom out and you look at all the non-single family homes, your properties, you're talking about, including vacant land, about 50 million commercial assets, tax lots. So even if you're just comparing two data sets, that's 50 million times 50 million. That's a really big number, a number of permutations on how you can match. And so we, for the first time, this is about 4 years ago, really turned to AI and machine learning, and we're able to crack the code doing that. So to answer your question, we turn to technology, truly, not just from a marketing gimmick point of view, to be able to crack that code.
Got it. So you start out with an idea, you have a plan, it's working in one area, you go to the next market, you realize, one market doesn't work like the other market. And in each case, are you basically scraping data from public sites? Is that kind of where the starting point?
Good question. So what happened is, when we realized we had hit pay dirt with this Reonomy ID and this machine learning classifier that enabled us to not just light up the top markets, but every market in the US, we said, well, let's get as much data as we can, right? Because now we've sort of eliminated the barrier to entry to stand up additional markets, as well as the barrier to entry to normalize and validate and cleanse data sets, right? So what we did is, yes, we collect at the source, but we supplement, and that source being the local municipality, the tax assessor, the Secretary of State, but we've supplemented that with large third-party partnerships that we have, many of them exclusive, where we're the only ones in commercial real estate that get access to that data. So these are companies the likes of Dun & Bradstreet, CoreLogic, Black Knight, First American, Experian. The list goes on and on. These are what I call our raw materials, our ingredients, right? We're like the chef. We have these very unique recipes where we know how to take all these amazing ingredients, combine them in a way that bakes the best cakes available. And that's really what our end users are buying from us, our licensing, whether it's through our web application, our APIs, our data feed products. It is the Reonomy data set, which is derived, which takes all this raw materials across public and private data sources, as we mentioned, and compiles them in a way that is informative and valuable.
Right. And I think one of the things as a user, just having the uniform presentation of the data is, it just saves a lot of brain cells when you know that you look at one property and you can look at another property and you're going to get the information in a similar way. You don't have to become a programmer to try and understand.
Exactly. You don't need a PhD to figure it out. And look, that is a very important point you make, because that is something in general, but especially I found in commercial real estate that gets overlooked, is the UI, the user interface, the experience, the consistency of it, and making sure, as I said at the onset, it is modern. My iPhone is essentially a supercomputer, but a 3-year-old can use it, right? And so getting to that level of sophistication and heavyweight analysis on the back end, but to some extent shielding the end user from that and making sure it is consistent, elegant, intuitive, and usable is a very important flip side to the coin of machine learning and AI. It's the delivery, how you deliver it is crucial as well.
Got it. So is your business, would it be fair to kind of call it a data aggregator? Is that, as far as you're going out and you're getting...
Part of what we do, that is part of what we do. I view that as a means to an end. The end being, what are the insights we can give? Really, it's an intelligence platform, right? Because we are providing intelligence, property intelligence, but also intelligence on companies and people and how they relate to those properties, as you and I were chatting before the show, right? But before we can do any of that, you're absolutely right. We need to be able to aggregate disparate data sets that are messy, fragmented, and make them relational, basically, put them in order. Again, the same way a chef, prepares all the ingredients before they figure out how to cook the dish. That is a necessary means, and that is a big part of our core IP and our core competency, is we've developed this system that's just really good at aggregating data.
Gotcha. And as far as the data that you're collecting, is there any, I guess, quality control, for lack of a better word, to recognize, I guess, kind of boots on the ground to confirm the data, or how do you guys police that?
Yeah. So there's multiple tiers of that. Really, three main legs of that stool. One is programmatically. Those machine learning systems have built within, and that's where the learning part of machine learning, we're constantly retraining it with training sets, whether it's new data sets or training sets that come from the usage of our platform, the users themselves using the platform, and basically being able to signal an incorrect or incomplete data set. It feeds back into the system, and it gets smarter over time and gets better at identifying what the correct value for an individual data point. And we're not perfect, we never will be, but we're constantly getting better. And every day that goes by is a day that we are iterating, or the system iterates and evolves and becomes stronger. So that's the sort of technological component. We do amplify that with our own in-house research team. It's not a big research team, but it's sort of, we call it the SWAT team, that goes deep and does two things. One is they help curate those training sets that are so valuable to the system, but they also help to crack the code on some of the really hairy problems, the edge cases that perhaps are not as well suited for the system. So that's number two. And number three, and I alluded to this, is we've got this unfair competitive advantage where we have 100,000 plus users on our platform, that web app, the Zillow-like experience, and their usage. And we never take, what one user sees or does and share it or everything. But in aggregate, when you can take all that usage data, that is really valuable from a learning and data sanctity perspective. And so we leverage that heavily as well.
On the uniformity of the information, I'm just kind of curious. All of these municipalities, it doesn't matter whether it's a state or company or county or whatever, that everybody invests so much money into creating a data collection system and maintaining that, and on and on. I'm just wondering, have you been approached or have you had any conversations with any municipalities about
Great question. That's a
being the backbone or the kind of the back office support for that? Because I could see that as you know, every
yeah,
municipality is stretched for funding,
for sure.
and you know, I would think that if there's a better way that's a lesser cost, that would be of interest.
That's a great
And
point.
so, is that anything like that?
It is. It's very topical. I would say two things. One is it's something that is already in flight. We have a number of municipalities, tax assessors that use our system, ironically, to vet their own data because ultimately, because we're multi-sourcing it, we'll have better or more timely data than they have access to. But to take it a step further, which is where you're going, this has been a hot topic of conversation at a board level with us because given the fact that we've got this system of record, the Reonomy ID, which you use the term backbone, which is exactly how we think about it, then yes, if you go all the way upstream, the natural extension is right at the source. If the Reonomy ID can be embedded as you're recording a mortgage, recording a deed transaction, et cetera, then to your point, it eliminates a lot of the friction, the cost, the inefficiencies that are going on and that we've seen now during the COVID crisis, right? When a lot of these assessors have had to shut down because literally the people can't go there to record the mortgages because they do it the old-fashioned way, right? It's analog, it's not digital. And so yes, that is a stream of work that is ongoing with us. Now, as you know, right, elephant in the room, working with local government agencies is never fast. And so a lot of these things are going to take quarters, if not years, to come to fruition. And you're talking a lot of different agencies, but certainly it is something that we believe is valuable and frankly will benefit the overall market.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with just different public agencies, and you know, it's never. It's amused me just how protective they can be about their position based on historical. This is the way we do it,
Right.
kind of thing. Regardless of there's an example, local example. I was on a committee, and the committee was is responsible for one thing, and then there's a whole nother branch of government that does a different thing but calls on the exact same people for the exact same thing. And I was going like, that's like two cars driving down the street, both stopping at the same place, you know, taking up the consumer's time twice as
Right.
opposed to once. And I'm going, how does that not does anybody else see that, you know? And they're like,
How
no,
does
we
that
do
make
it totally differently, our concerns are totally. I'm going, you know, as a user I just don't see it, you know.
right?
I just, but it was just it was a real eye-opener, just how territorial. And I think you know, as you look at politics and stuff, you can see that real easy, that it's, you know, if anybody's going to lose, it's not going to be me, it's going to be the other guy, kind of thing. So I wish
Mm-hmm.
you well with that. But it does seem to make sense if uh, you know, the governments are stretched. If there was a way that you could become the backbone and they could feed your platform, it seems like that'd be a win-win for you, because you would have the
Right.
data at least at the source. They'd have the
Yep.
backbone.
Exactly.
Um, so I wish you well with that. But I know as a user, uh, you know, there's nothing more frustrating than if you buy you know, a data set. I mean, I've done this with marketing before, where you buy a list and, you know, maybe 5% of it's accurate. You know, you're just,
Yeah.
and I know that data is, it's just always a challenge. That's why I'm kind of curious, like you know, we're talking about some sort of verification or quality control of that. Question I have for you going forward, are there additional data points that you recognize that would be useful that you could set on the platform, or that people have approached you about?
Yeah, so I alluded to this. So when we started off, and that's where the system of record, really, we were very property centric, right? We were really good at telling you most everything there is to know about a property, right? Who owns it, who owns the debt, how much debt, what the zoning is, what all the addresses are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So let me ask you that before I stop you there just for a second. So when you say that the basics, ownership, great, lender, great, which would be to me kind of like a transactional stuff at a title
Yeah.
from the county is kind of a starting point. What about the property details, the square footage, year built? And I'm thinking more about like the
Physical
permits,
attributes. Yeah.
all the county stuff that, that as an insurance professional, that the questions I always am trying to answer are, when was this updated, and if there's permits, et cetera, kind of thing. Are those types of data points, are those ones that you guys?
We do. But as you alluded to, it varies, right? And to some extent, we're at the mercy of what is recorded and how and when, right? And that goes back to your whole question around, well, if we could be the system of record, wouldn't that be better for everyone? Certainly better for us, but better for you, the end user, right? Because we'd have a more timely and minimize the latency, et cetera. So there are some counties that are pretty abysmal, right, in terms of when and how they update their records. And unfortunately, we're at the mercy. There are others where they're at the forefront and it's digitized, it's available via API, they update it intraday, multiple times a day, not just once a day, right? And there's everything in between. Now, where we strive to be the best, but not perfect, and again, the bar varies by county, is that we multi-source it. We never just take one source and say, okay, well, this is where we're getting the data for county X and this is where we're getting it for county Y. We get it from many redundant sources. And a lot of time you may ask, well, what's the point? Because to your point, it's like the same data set and you'll get the same value for the same square footage point. But oftentimes you won't. And right, that's where the algorithms come into play, and they're learning, okay, for this type of property in this county, for this type of record, this data point, what is the most accurate source? And that's constantly iterating and trying to figure out, who wins in that scenario across our data set. And that's the sophistication that goes in the background to try and assess what the most complete, most accurate picture is for any given property as it relates to the data points that you're saying.
No, I think that the multiple sets, I mean, that's a real challenge I see, just based on, if you start with a county record and you assume that's kind of the, assume loosely that's kind of the good starting point. But I've found, many times that either it's absent or incorrect, or
Yep.
maybe the assessor or whoever's in the field is having a bad day, or maybe the property owner did some things that didn't ever get recorded.
Absolutely. There's myriad of reasons.
Yeah. So, well, no, I think that it's all fascinating. And the, I think the other thing that I'm really kind of recognizing is that for all these years that I've been putting data in the computer, in the machine, that I couldn't understand, what does this have to do with anything?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the era of big data and the ability, or I guess data science, is really coming to life. And that all that information that's been collected now, there are people that are able to comb through it, and whether it be, apply it in a situation like this, use it to forecast or to see trends or what have you. It is kind of fascinating when you look at it from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
But so let me ask you this: the obviously Reonomy, you guys are a big player. I think I mentioned to you, I've used Yardi and CoStar before. Do you see this as like, is the field, is it, I guess I'm trying to understand the competition, because I guess in your business, I would think probably the biggest potential challenger in this field would be Google itself.
Well,
Just
that's
if,
true for any field, right? Because,
yeah, no,
as I chat with a lot of my founder friends, is Google can basically wake up one day and go into any field, and they're going to make a dent.
yeah, I mean, insurance included. I'm just kind of curious. Do you, when looking at the current field, are there some distinctions that you see that Reonomy has that sets you apart in a way that.
Yeah, look, to some extent, most, if not all, the legacy incumbents that you talked about, right, have been around for decades, right? And so,
Mhm.
and they've built great businesses. I mean, CoStar's market cap is north of 25 billion at this point, right? And so, and they are used by a lot of folks, but they have been built across several decades. And so it goes back to what I'm talking about, modernity, modern. What is the modern solution? So we like to think of ourselves, and our users, more importantly, think of us as the modern solution to commercial real estate data and analytics and intelligence and insights. Because we've had the benefit of hindsight and looking at what others do well and don't do well, but we've also had the benefit of building our system from scratch on bleeding edge technology, bleeding edge databases, cloud computing, machine learning, AI, and a lot of the software and tools we use just didn't exist even when we started the company, right? So that is our sort of differentiation when you look at the landscape. And then when you look at the new entrants, right, because there has been a proliferation of CRE tech, prop tech companies over the last 5 or so years. To your point around reaching the critical mass, getting to a certain point, we feel like we are one of very few companies out there that has managed to reach that critical mass, that adoption, and not just in terms of the fundraising that we've done, right? With the Series D last year, a lot of the banks participated because of the risk and underwriting that you can do with our data, but also just in terms of being in market and the validation we've got from our end users themselves. So we differentiate with the legacy incumbents by being more modern, and we feel like we differentiate with some of the newer companies by being sort of more established and more validated and more trustworthy a solution than those.
Gotcha. And I meant to ask you earlier, in the beginning when you guys started, have you always been a subscription based
Yes, we've
service?
always been a
Okay.
subscription based. Yes, whether it's on our web application where it's every user has a license and it's recurring and they renew and all that stuff, and on the data, you're licensing our data on a recurring basis. Correct. It's subscription based.
Gotcha. I'm kind of curious, being somebody that's so familiar with the data, like you are, and just the commercial real estate. Today is what is today? July 22nd, I believe, 2020.
Yes.
When we are recording, in the middle of a COVID or the COVID-19 situation. I'm kind of curious if you can speak to, or if you see any. Are you seeing anything? Are you able to identify anything that's changing, or do you have any kind of a crystal ball button on the application that says, you know, this is changing just across the commercial real estate asset classes?
Yeah. So we've actually got a whole part of Reonomy, our Reonomy research, and we've got a bunch of very smart folks that leverage our data, that put out a whole bunch of reports, analysis, data sets, a lot of it dynamically updated. So I'd encourage everyone to go to reonomy.com and click on our research section. And they're putting out a lot of bleeding edge stuff that's being used and picked up by government agencies and stuff. So yeah, we're seeing a lot. I think some of the highlights we are seeing, if I rewind a few months, is that we're seeing a huge slowdown, not surprisingly when you think about it, on in terms of transaction velocity, right? Just the number of transactions that are happening or haven't happened in Q2 certainly was a prodigious fall from where we were in Q1, but even Q2 last year. And that's felt all the more acutely within office, retail, and hospitality. Interestingly, multifamily has been somewhat resistant, although questions remain as to how long they can be resistant. And equally interesting, we have seen some asset classes that have actually outperformed compared to where they were historically, specifically industrial, warehouse. Again, with a move to a lot of work from home, you need all these data centers, they take room and all that stuff. And so there has been a lot of interest on there. So yes, you can see a lot of that stuff on the platform. And again, I'd encourage everyone to go to the research section where a lot of that cutting edge data is being leveraged and shown in a very easy to digest way. But it's very enlightening.
I appreciate that. Typical user, Obviously, we've talked about the commercial real estate people. We've mentioned the a fair amount of insurance people use it. Is there a target user,
Yeah.
or if you?
The four main user groups, if you will, are lenders. So typically the loan originators. We mentioned that a lot of the big banks and their originators use our platform to find which properties are in the refinance window, drill down on who owns them, but they also use it increasingly for risk underwriting, compliance, et cetera, to find out information about who they're lending to. What is the portfolio of properties associated with any given person or company, right? So you've got lenders on the one hand. You've got a lot of institutional investors, developers, either people who buy the properties, and they don't just have to be the large ones. They can also be small local folks, but these are folks who do this day in, day out. These are the professionals who look for that assemblage that they can combine, look for that repositioned opportunity from an asset point of view. Third is you have the brokers, not surprisingly. Brokerage firms have widely adopted our platform, our products for a number of years now. So these are typically the capital markets folks, investment sales brokers, chief among them. And then last but not least, and this is the one where we alluded to, are the field service providers. We have a lot of roofers, solar folks, energy folks who use our platform from a lead gen perspective, because to your point around buying a list from a marketing perspective, typically those lists are pretty coarse. And it's, the analogy is it's a shotgun scatter approach, and say somewhere in that list is a property owner or two that might have a need for your service. But good luck finding it, right? Because you don't have the ability to take that list and filter it, right? And so if you think about what our platform really does for those field service providers, it allows them to dial in the location, right? I'm interested in this area of the country, and they can literally draw on the map. I'm interested in this type of property, multifamily only, and this size, and I'm only interested in ones that are old, right? Haven't been renovated in the last 20 years or whatever. And then you go from 50 million assets throughout the US to the 13 that really are in your strike zone. And then you can tell me, okay, who owns those and what's their phone number and all that stuff. That's the type of lead list that you would want, that the field service provider wants, versus, tens of thousands of people. And to your point, only a very small percentage are even relevant, let alone accurate.
Right. No, I've spent a lot of money on lists that are, I mean, it's frustrating. I mean, there's always a couple of golden nuggets in there that you do ferret out, which, I mean, but that's just kind of that's no different than cold calling, the law of big numbers. If whatever your numbers are, if you call enough people, there's somebody that needs to buy or somebody needs your product, kind of thing. But no, I appreciate you sharing that. Rich, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As I mentioned to you, by day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different strategies we typically consider. The first is we look at, can we avoid the risk? If that's not a possibility, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And then if neither of those are an option, we look to see if we can transfer the risk. And that's essentially what an insurance policy is.
Exactly.
And I like to ask my guest if they can take a look at, their business, their clients, somewhere in that spectrum, and if they can identify what they consider to be the biggest risk.
Sure.
And again, for clarity, I'm not necessarily limiting this to an insurance-related answer, but if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Rich Sarkis, what is the biggest risk?
So from my point of view, the biggest risk right now that folks within our industry have is the risk of complacency, the risk of getting crippled by what's going on with COVID-19. And obviously the situation is fluid, it's evolving, it's to some extent getting worse in many areas of the country, and that is not good news. And there's no real light at the end of the tunnel, because yes, there's vaccines in flight and therapeutics, et cetera, but nothing really concrete that's readily available and where we can say, okay, by this date, business as usual, right? And so in the face of such huge and unprecedented uncertainty, the biggest risk right now for companies and individuals alike is to almost freeze and to not make decisions that they ought to be making. In our world, that means specifically embracing data, technology, information, insights to be able to, when things do pick back up, be on the front foot and not get caught shortchanged, basically. And to probe a little bit deeper, one of the things that recessions tend to do, right? And we don't know if we've seen the last of the, big dip that we had in March, April, and whether it's a true V, recovery, but there are going to be headwinds at the very least. And we're even seeing, job numbers come back and where it was picking up now because states are having to shut down again, it's going to create some more negative outlook there. One of the benefits, perversely enough, of a shock to the economic or financial system is it shines a light on inefficiencies. And whereas when the sun's out and everyone's making hay, you can sort of throw more bodies at the problem and say, oh, hire more people and we'll do this, do that. When times are tough and belt tightening happens, it's like, well, what are these people doing? Do I really need this? This is how we do that. And so when you are critically looking at those inefficiencies, there's almost this cleansing mechanism where you then say, okay, well, what is the most efficient way to do this function, or to prospect, to risk, to assess risk, to underwrite, to whatever it is, to conduct an appraisal. And that's where invariably all roads lead to data, technology, systems, and machines doing what a lot of folks were doing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying machines will do everything, but it's really the highest best use, and making sure that the appraisers, the brokers, the investors, the lenders, the insurance agents are focusing on their highest best use, which is bringing their local knowledge, their insights, their judgment. And that's things that are very difficult to train a system to do, right? And let the computers and the machines and the data crunch through all the data and do the dirty work, frankly, right? The 80% of it, and let the people do the 20% of their highest best use. And so the biggest risk is to not embrace that, not realize that there is this huge opportunity ahead of all of us to really sort of shift the paradigm and go to a much more efficient and I believe sustainable long-term outlook for the industry.
Yeah, no, I think the future has a few more surprises in store, and I agree with you. I think one of the healthy things that does come of these challenges is, people get lean and recognize that maybe there's a better way, more efficient way to do things, and it usually does. That's kind of what propels the growth in the end. Is that you? Yeah, that's good. Hey, Rich, where can the listeners go if they would like to learn more or connect with you?
Absolutely. They should go to Reonomy.com. As I mentioned, that is not only where they can find out more about the products and data that we offer, but also where there's a bunch of free resources that folks can sign up for and enjoy, whether it's research on what the COVID impact has been on our markets, or research at large about different asset types and markets and what we've seen historically.
Awesome. Rich, I can't say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've enjoyed it greatly, learned a lot, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.